All right, welcome back into this Tuesday, November 24th edition of Around the Bases from 110 Sports. Here at 110sportsmedia.com, YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, where you can just search for 110 Sports to get all of our latest shows, podcasts, and more. Time to dive now into, as promised, our off-season division previews for the West divisions. We're going to start with the AL West. And basically, we've been doing these for the other divisions, the Central divisions, the East divisions. We're going to go through each team in these divisions. We're going to talk a little bit about a reminder how this past season went, what the big lesson was learned, what grade I gave them for this past season, if they've done anything notable so far this offseason, and what are some of the key questions and needs for this team this winter. So it's kind of a lot, but I'll try to boil it down into just a couple of main ideas for each team. And we're going to start, of course, with the AL West, like I said, where we had just one team finish above 500 in 2020 in the shortened season. That was the Oakland Athletics. The Houston Astros made the playoffs as one of two teams that made the playoffs despite finishing under 500. And the rest of the division, there was a lot of underperformance when it comes to underperforming expectations, from the Angels to the Rangers. Of course, the Mariners are still in the midst of a rebuild. So we'll talk about those teams as we get to them. We're going to start, though, with the Houston Astros. As I pull those notes up here we go. The Houston Astros. Of course, expectations were high for this team entering the season, in their first season following the sign stealing scandal, but they were the preseason World Series favorites, but they struggled. Of course, as I mentioned, they finished with a below 500 record for the first time since 2014. They had a lot of key injuries, a lot of underperforming core hitters, and at the same time, of course, you got to give credit to the Astros for pushing through those injuries and those underperformance. Dusty Baker leading the club to the playoffs as the sixth seed in the American League field. And after that, Houston's collective postseason experience kind of took over. They defeated the Twins and the A's the first two rounds of the playoffs, almost came back against the Rays in the ALCS, but fell short in that series to end their season. So I gave them a C grade for the season. Because, of course, a deep postseason run like that usually gets you a higher grade, but given the expectations for them, I couldn't get too high with that grade. But the big lesson learned for them, it came from the postseason, is that their window for contention is still wide open, I should say. Justin Verlander is going to be out all of next year after Tommy John surgery. The club could lose George Springer and Michael Brantley in free agency, so yeah, there are some concerns. But aside from those guys, the rest of the Astros roster is pretty much set to return. Bregman, Correa, Altuve, Gurriel, all going to be back, as well as breakout outfielder Kyle Tucker. Yordan Alvarez going to come back from injury and be the DH, and a solid rotation, along with some young bullpen arms that are interesting. The Astros are still in a good position to make a deep postseason run next season. There are a couple key questions for them this offseason, but really it's just a couple. It's those outfielders that are the big question for the Astros. So the key questions for them, like I said, will Springer be re-signed? It seems like Brantley would be more likely. There's a good chance that Springer, as one of the very top position players in the free agent market this offseason, is going to leave for a bigger contract elsewhere. That seems likely at this point. But there's also a chance that the Astros are able to re-sign him. Another question, maybe we see a contract extension for Carlos Correa. He's set to hit free agency after next season, so maybe we see that this offseason. But their needs this offseason are very clear. It's the outfield. Jackie Bradley Jr., they've been connected to him. Maybe Jock Peterson is a fit. They could also use some bullpen help, some veteran bullpen help, to go alongside some of those intriguing young relievers. But generally speaking, it's a couple of key areas for the Astros, and they're going to be in good position to compete again in 2021. Next team I want to discuss is the Los Angeles Angels. No team in baseball in 2020, in my estimation, was a bigger disappointment than the Angels. They brought in Joe Madden. They signed Anthony Rendon. They had Shohei Ohtani returning as a two-way player. They had Mike Trout. And they still missed the postseason, despite the expanded field and playing in a division that was incredibly weak. Their offense was about normal, slightly above average, but their team ERA was in the bottom 5 in the league. Dylan Bundy had a breakout year, but there wasn't much else consistent in the rotation. And the Angels finished in 4th place in the division. And they learned that they need significant pitching help because starters not named Dylan Bundy posted a 6.23 ERA in 2020. The bullpen didn't do very well either, and they blew an MLB high 14 saves. So there are some offensive holes, but the big thing for the Angels this offseason is they need pitching. They need a way to upgrade their pitching staff. That's one of the big questions for them, and I projected that Trevor Bauer would sign there. I mean, that would be huge for them to have that ace and have him and Bundy at the top of that rotation. They need to do something when it comes to their pitching. Otherwise, I don't know how we can expect a different result. They also have some questions at closer. I don't think they probably won't spend big there, in my estimation. But they need to bring in some veteran, somebody. And if they don't bring in, the star, if they don't pay up for Trevor Bauer, and we don't know what contract he's going to demand in this market, then I don't know. You got to go after Masahiro Tanaka or Jake Odorizzi or somebody to help try to stabilize that rotation. Because the Angels are really top heavy in terms of a couple of offensive stars where if they don't work out, then you're in trouble because your rotation is not very deep either. So they need answers. They also need a middle infielder because Andrelton Simmons is a free agent. Tommy La Stella is a free agent. David Fletcher had a good year last year. He'll be in the middle infield, but maybe they sign a shortstop like Marcus Semien or Didi Gregorius or a second baseman like Colton Wong. They're in a tricky spot. I mean, they got to do something. This is a lot of money in this team, and Mike Trout is getting older every year and still not making the postseason. And they need to do something, and I think adding Trevor Bauer would be big for them. That was one of my predictions. All right, next team I want to discuss here is the Oakland Athletics, and I should mention I gave the Angels an F grade because, like I said, biggest disappointment in my estimation last year. The Oakland Athletics I gave an A minus. They took advantage of the Astros' struggles. They dethroned Houston. They won the AL West for the first time since 2013. They were a really good team, second best record in the American League, only behind the Rays. And they weathered the loss of Matt Chapman. And they had some of their hitting stars who weren't doing as well as they normally do, because they had the fifth best team ERA in baseball, the top ranked bullpen ERA. They snapped a streak of 9 straight losses in winner-take-all postseason games, defeating the White Sox in the wild card series, but then they lost to the Astros in the ALDS. The big lesson learned for them: the team made strides, but again, it's the same result at the end of the day for the A's that they were hoping to avoid at the end of the season, a relatively early knockout from the postseason. Their top-end talent just doesn't quite measure up. They're a team full of good and exciting players. They're very likable. They can compete against the best, but against the best of the best, it's clear that just roster depth, determination, it can only get you so far most of the time. Star power does matter, and the A's just haven't had quite the star power to match up against the very best teams in baseball. Key questions for them this offseason: will Marcus Semien return? He's been the longest tenured A's player that was on the roster this past year. Shortstop had a breakout 2019, struggled a bit this past year. Unclear what kind of contract he might get. He could try to rebuild his value on a 1-year deal, in which case maybe he returns, or if he gets a 2 or 3 year deal, he's probably leaving. There's also questions about the ninth inning, as Liam Hendriks has been their closer. He's going to get a big deal. It's going to be somewhere other than Oakland. They have questions in the middle infield, both spots right now, so they could use an addition there. Don't expect them to go big and add TJ LeMahieu, but a smaller deal, a Cesar Hernandez, a Colton Wong, a Freddie Galvis, something like that could be in the cards for the A's. They also could use some proven bullpen arms because they have several high-leverage relievers who are now free agents in addition to in addition to Liam Hendriks. And so they could re-sign a few of those guys, but I could also see something like a Sergio Romo, a Trevor Rosenthal, an Alex Colomé, if their price isn't too high, being fits for the Oakland Athletics this offseason. All right, second to last team to discuss here in the AL West is the Seattle Mariners. I gave them a B grade for their 2020 season. Of course, they didn't make the postseason, but again, these grades that I gave out a couple weeks ago for the full season are relative to expectations and circumstances for these individual teams. So this was the second year of a rebuilding effort for the Mariners, and considering that, it went about as well as you could expect because they were not too far out of the playoff picture down the stretch. They ended up as the first team outside of the playoffs in the American League. They weren't all that close, but that's of the teams that made it, they were the first team out. So that means something. And for a team, again, in the midst of a rebuilding process, they also learned about some of their young talent and added some young talent, and they've got a bright future. Center fielder Kyle Lewis was the unanimous winner of the AL Rookie of the Year award. They had a couple pitchers, Justice Sheffield, Justin Dunn, showing promise in the rotation. Utility man Dylan Moore impressed with an 855 OPS. They added highly regarded outfield prospect Taylor Trammell in a trade with the Padres. Top prospect Jared Kelenic isn't far from making his debut. Things are looking up for the Mariners, and 2020 was an indication of that. That the rebuild is heading in the right direction. They have questions this offseason. Well, how do they address the bullpen? It was the worst in the American League this past season in terms of ERA. They don't have many experienced options. Don't expect them to necessarily spend big on one, but there's just a lot of pitchers out there with late inning experience who probably won't be too expensive. So I think that's going to be one of their number one priorities this offseason. Of course, really for the Mariners, though, the question is going to be, the next wave of prospects. When do they arrive? Questions that aren't going to be answered this winter. But as far as this offseason, I think maybe a cheap starter gets added, but I think veteran bullpen help is the big priority for the Mariners. Don't expect a huge offseason for them, but I think focusing in on that bullpen, that's going to be the key. Final team to discuss here in the AL West is the Texas Rangers, who I gave a D grade for their 2020 performance. It was a truly horrendous season for the Rangers in 2020. Worst record of the American League, worst winning percentage since 1973. They were 23rd in team ERA. They were 29th in runs scored and OPS. There were few positives to speak of on this Rangers team outside of Lance Lynn, throwing an MLB high 84 innings with a 3.32 ERA. There's some encouraging young players on this Rangers team, but there's very little in terms of certain production heading into the offseason. Production they can count on. Guys that you can say, oh, wow, he's a lock at that spot, and he's going to give us good production, whether it be a position player or pitcher. There's just very few of those guys right now. They learned this year that a quick rebuild wasn't going to get the job done. A larger rebuild is probably necessary at this point. They tried to do it quickly, tried to on-the-fly rebuild. They added Corey Kluber. They had Corey Kluber coming back, and Mike Minor and Lance Lynn, and some reasons to believe they could maybe make a run at a playoff spot. One of those, especially with the playoff field expanded, that if things broke right, they could be somewhat competitive. But things did not break right. Mike Minor was bad. He got traded. Corey Kluber got injured. He didn't even finish his first start. Elvis Andrus took a major step back at the plate. Joey Gallo was inconsistent. There were just no proven top-tier bats around Gallo in the lineup. And so it looks like it's going to probably take a few years for the Rangers to be competitive again. They're not in a great spot right now. They're not in a great spot at all. It can be changed relatively quickly. It's not a hopeless situation, but they're not in a great spot. They need an offensive boost because they had the lowest batting average, on-base percentage, and slugging percentage in the American League. Their number 3 hitters in the lineup hit 145 collectively. Like, they just have no proven hitters that they can count on in that lineup, aside from an inconsistent Joey Gallo, which by definition you can't really count on him for too much more than a lot of home runs and a lot of strikeouts. They also have questions in the closer spot. That's not really a big overall concern. So yeah, they could use some impact bats. They could go out and sign Marcell Ozuna, but they're not really in that spot right now. I don't think that would be a good idea for them. I think it's going to be marginal ads. Maybe they add a Carlos Santana, Ryan Braun, somebody, a veteran who can come in on a short-term deal and just add a little stability to the lineup in the meantime. But they're not in a great spot.